Mark, Quee, and I did, where we were trying to see if there was a yield difference on brassicas following a cover crop if we grazed it versus not grazing it. Mark had to leave, so we can talk about it. But he'll be back tomorrow, so you can also ask him a question. We were interested in finding ways to incorporate our livestock more into our vegetable operations, and so we were curious if grazing a spring seeded cover crop before a fall brassica crop, so all one season, would increase the brassica yield. And then we were also interested if grazing would have an impact on soil fertility. So this is a 2-year trial. And in 2017, we did not measure the soil. We did not take soil samples because we didn't think of it. So then this year we did. So sort of evolving. So this is just kind of a little overview of how the trial worked. We planted our cover crop in late March. And we did oats and peas. And Mark has a drill, so he was able to actually drill in his cover crop, which I think was sort of a difference between our two farms, because I used a much higher seeding rate where I was broadcasting, and ended up having I was kind of incredible. It snowed this year 4 times after I planted my cover crop, and so I really was didn't think it was going to come out because I broadcasted it, but it ended up being very thick because I planted it so thick. So that was a surprise, but I think that was a difference between our two farms. And then in late June or early July, we terminated the cover crop by mowing and tilling it in. And then we planted in that zone. Mark measured broccoli, I measured Brussels sprouts. And so then we measured if there was a yield difference on those crops during harvest in November. So sort of a long trial, March to November. In 2017, these are my results. This was sprouts per plant of grazed versus ungrazed. So everything had the same cover crop on it, and then the difference was just if we grazed it. So in 2017, it was not statistically relevant, but it did seem like I had higher yields of sprouts per plant on the grazed portions rather than the ungrazed portions, which is why we were interested in redoing it to see if we could replicate that results and if it would be statistically relevant. Of course, that's not what happened. Preview. So this is the results in 2017. You can see here there looked like there was a lot more sprouts per plant on grazed versus ungrazed, even though it wasn't statistically relevant. So that was oh cool, that would be awesome. So then this is just an overview of sort of how we set it up this year. And this was my research assistant we measured biomass both before grazing and after grazing. That's Kason, he loved it. Those are the sheep. We used portable electric netting to move it around, and you can see it's pretty thick. I don't think there's a picture of Mark's in here, but it's thicker than his. So we were grazing a lot of sheep on a relatively small area on our farm, so that meant they were only on there for probably about 5 hours, I think, and was also the biggest challenge of this trial, similar to what Wade said earlier, moving the animals around, so it was a lot of chasing sheep, which was not great, to be totally honest. So this was the biomass that we measured of the pre-grazed, post-grazed, and the ungrazed portions. So you can see there's a lot more biomass going in on the ungrazed. Maybe I'll say about that. That is a picture of, this is the Brussels sprouts here. This is other Brussels over here in this field. We harvested these ones, so this is what's left. That's what the sprouts looked like. That's our harvesting picture. So this year you can see there wasn't a huge difference. Between the grazed and ungrazed, like that's 60 and that's 58, so it was right in the same range there. And there also wasn't a difference in the sprout size, so we, besides measuring sprouts per plant, we also measured the sprout length, and this is just that in a different way. So then this year, something that we did different was we also measured our soil, and this is where I think that I don't know very much, and also found our results to be really interesting. So you can see, even in March, we had not grazed yet. This is like, we took the first soil sample the day that we planted the cover crop. There was a difference between the grazed and ungrazed portions in the same field, and we had like a randomized replicated trial, so it wasn't like we were just taking half the field and half the field. So we don't know why that happened, and then you can see the numbers went way up in both. So there didn't seem to be a soil difference from the grazing, but there was a large difference from the cover crop itself. So I'm sure lots of you might have more thoughts about that than I do, so we'll get there. So this is on Mark's farm, kind of what it looked like. He did a smaller amount of cover crop, I think 2. Those are his sheep. So that's kind of how he set it up. So like I said, it was similar, but we slightly different dates. I think I both started my cover crop and grazed earlier than he did. He measured broccoli rather than Brussels sprouts. That was another difference. And he found that he did have statistically relevant that there was higher yield on broccoli crowns on the ungrazed rather than the grazed portions, which is not what we thought would happen. And he did say that he ended up harvesting the broccoli crowns a little bit before he had planned on it, because he could see a lot of rain in the forecast, which ended up being 5 weeks of rain. So he felt like he needed to get that broccoli out of there, but he wondered if it had been able to play out and mature the way you might hope, that it might have looked a little different, but we don't know. So yeah, that's the weight. The first one was
Weight per area.
Weight per area, and then this is just pounds per crown. So, and then these, yeah, that's more info there. And then this is Mark's soil results, and this also was something that I thought was interesting, was our soil results looked very different, but our farms have had similar practices for a long time, and so this was also kind of a surprise, is how different our soil results turned out. And we're not that far apart from each other either, which is worth noting. So yeah, this is just more kind of like what I mentioned about Mark's findings. So for conclusions and next steps, I don't really know what the conclusion is. I was like hoping we'd be like, yeah, grazing, totally helpful, we should totally graze our cover crops. And it makes a big yield difference. That's not what we found. And we also had thought that maybe this year taking the soil samples would help like explain what we were seeing last year, and instead I felt like it just yielded more questions rather than answers. So I have a lot of questions about like what was happening there. We like couldn't measure everything. So for example, you could see in my biomass results, we were returning a lot of biomass into the soil, and I noticed like when it got dry in late July, especially in 2017, more than this year, that we had returned so much biomass back into the soil that field was holding moisture better than the soil in other parts of my farm, so I had to irrigate that field less. And I didn't measure that with the cool thing, right? But I think that anecdotally, I felt like there was maybe other things happening that we didn't measure. And I also, we know that the benefits of grazing might not be represented in soil tests from this year, but we might be seeing more impacts of things that we've done in previous years. So I think that's a big question. And I don't know what the next steps are. I think Mark and I haven't talked about if we're interested in doing it again. It's kind of a difficult trial for a lot of reasons, like I said, chasing sheep. And that kind of thing. So I think we have to see what we're interested in doing. But I definitely feel like I still have a lot of questions here about what's happening, and so I'm looking forward to hearing what all of you think. If you have any answers for me. Right, yeah, Bruce says if we keep chasing the sheep, that's like running. Great advice. Yeah.
In yours, I assume you didn't take any credit for the weight gain or whatever, the maintenance of the sheep.
Yeah, so the question was if we looked at the maintenance or weight gain of the sheep, and no, we didn't. And that's something I think would be more, yeah, I felt like that was like a little lacking of what the benefit was on the animals of grazing. But like I said, we were grazing for a relatively short amount of time because it's not a huge area. So I'm not sure about how the best way to do that is. Yeah.
You look at nutrient content for your plants.
The question was about nutrient content of the plants.
Did they change from one practice to the other, like bricks or?
Yeah, we didn't measure that.
You looked at quality indicators though.
Yeah, so we looked at quality indicators like color, and so on the Brussels sprouts, for example, we measured the color, the firmness of the sprout, the size of the sprout, and the number of sprouts per plant, which would indicate, I guess, but we didn't do any of those,
In
yeah.
2017, the color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in 2017, the color was better on the grazed ones, right? Yeah, it was better on the grazed ones. This year, there was so little difference, we didn't indicate any difference at all. Like, I laid them all out to try and see if I could, like, tell any difference at all in the color, and couldn't. So I guess there might be better ways than color, but.
Can you market that?
Can we market
Those quality factors?
the quality factors? Great question.
It's more that you can't market them if you don't.
Yeah. Liz said it's more like you can't market them if you don't have them. Yeah, I don't know. And I generally, like we sell most of the vegetables through the CSA, so we're not like going to like a market or wholesale situation. But our CSA customers can't get enough of the Brussels sprouts. So, yeah. So one guy this year, he surprised we had Brussels sprouts on his birthday, and he said that 38 was starting out great. So. So that was great for him. Yeah. Any other?
I'm really curious about next year what happens with the soil test. Even if you didn't do that, then you might put in there and treat the soil test to see what the benefit was on crops following.
Yeah, Kate says she's curious about the soil test next year, if it would seem like there was more of a difference between the grazed and ungrazed on the crops following. And I think that is a great question.
I'd like to see you put some lambs in there and then try to see what the gain, if there is a gain on.
Yeah, and then, the other question was if we put lambs instead of, we were grazing ewes rather than lambs, and Mark had both on his.
But even if you have both ewes and lambs, you can use those lambs.
To measure the weight gain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something we thought about too. I think if we had tamer sheep, you might feel more interested in that. The idea of trying to measure weight gain on 50.
I'll go with some goats.
We have goats too. I mean, maybe the solution is doing it with animals that are a little more understanding. Stefan,
How
yeah.
much did you push it? You said you had the animals on there for 5 hours.
Mhm.
That's not very long.
Yeah.
Or did you really reduce a lot of the biomass?
Mhm.
Look at Mark. How much more could you push that to take that down and have more manure in your deposition?
Yeah, so Stefan's question was how longer we could have pushed the sheep on there since we didn't have them on there very long. And the issue with that was actually that they didn't want to eat it because it was stemmy, because it was too tall. So I don't think we could have pushed it much further because they trampled it and were like no longer interested in eating it at a certain point. And that was a part of why we wanted to try the trial again this year rather than the previous year, because we waited too long to put it on. So this year we did great. We had 3 grazed plots, and we put them on the correct time for plot number 1, and then for plot number 2 we spent a week trying to get them into plot number 2. Because we had 1 try a day basically, and before we had to do other things. So then it was, by the time we actually got them on there, it was taller again. So we didn't feel like, and then we were uncomfortable leaving them in the electric netting overnight because they don't respect it quite enough. And the problem is, like on a vegetable farm, right, they had mentioned like these are next to other vegetable crops that are already planted that I cannot have the sheep eat. So yeah, and my sister here, sheep chaser, mentioned that field was in the worst location for herding this year, so it might be that we could like do a slightly better job in a different location, but this was the furthest from where the sheep is. And was there another part of your question?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Well, yeah, how much more you can leave them on, because if you
Oh.
can leave them on for more than a day because of the fence issue, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, and the other thing, well, and the other part of that I wanted to mention is like, we did ask the question of like, are they doing enough in that short amount of time? But Liz told me when I took the post-grazing biomass samples that she didn't want any poop in it, and it was actually incredibly difficult to get the biomass without poop on it. So they did, so that is to say, like they did do a lot on the portion in that amount of time. So,
Not random if you're going to food.
Outside your
Yeah.
office next time.
Ally?
So I just want to clarify, so you're saying that, like, it's a lot of work to move these sheep and to do this grazing because of the trial? Not because that it's like too difficult on a vegetable farm to rotate your sheep through a cover crop? It's just the randomized little plots that are separated, is that?
Good clarification, yeah. So the question was it hard because of the trial? Yes, that is why it was hard to get them into the like specific grazed portion that we wanted to be them in. So I do think if we were to do it again without the trial and we could just graze that whole section, it would be a lot easier. And we could also leave them on then, I think, for longer. But in order, that's as much space as we have for fall brassicas in our rotation, so we can't have that section be any larger, basically. So that's kind of the limitations, yeah.
What was the previous crop of both of you guys?
Yeah, so the question was what the previous crop was, and Liz, do you know what Mark's was? I don't. Mine was zucchini. Yeah, and I do want to mention, I do think that's right, obviously, I think like what's been in the field previously is important for understanding our soil results, so I wish I knew what Mark's was. But I think part of the previous, I think, 2 crops at least on that field had heavy rye mulch as part of it. We plant zucchini on black plastic mulch with rye mulch in between. So I do think that that field was in much better shape than I thought it was, actually. So, okay. That's 5 minutes. Yeah.
Carmen, instead of grazing the sheep while there's other vegetables growing and having that threat of the sheep potentially getting out and eating them, could you just be planting cover crops after you've harvested your vegetables in the fall and then grazing throughout fall, like your off vegetable season?
Yeah.
Do the fertility that way.
Yeah, so Megan's question was, could we graze in the off vegetable season on the vegetable fields? And I think that we want to do that. We have had a really hard time getting cover crops established after the vegetables come out in order to be able to do that. So we did try this year, and the only one we were able to get established was the sorghum Sudan we planted after garlic, because the garlic comes out in early July. Oh, and we did that. Oh yeah, we did oats and vetch on the onions also, which came out in late July. But then everything we planted after that, we tried to do rye on several things, did not get established. So
You do graze, stocks, right?
yeah, we also do graze like the residue after the vegetables are out. So that's like right now we could be grazing if we were more ambitious the end of the Brussels. We started when it was cold.
You have sweet corn fodder. If you do a sweet corn.
Yeah, we didn't do sweet corn this year, but that is, I mean, I think we've grazed a lot of the different residues at the end, and the sheep and goats seem to prefer the brassicas, actually, is their favorite. They'll eat, I think a lot, they don't like pepper stems, so they'll eat the peppers, anything that you have left on there, but there's a lot of stuff they won't eat. But the brassicas, they'll eat down to the base, which is nice. So.
Leftover cubes.
Yeah. Yeah, they did good on those too, so. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much.